Welcome to Japan Expert Insights and our Japanese Politics 101 room. Every Sunday, Timothy Langley, who runs a company in Tokyo that focuses exclusively on Japanese politics, government, and public affairs, and host Maya Matsuoka, bring to you the latest developments in Japanese politics. In this podcast, we welcome comments, questions, and opinions, so if you haven't done so yet, join us next time. In the meantime, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the conversations on Japanese politics, business insights, and Japan's role in the Indo-Pacific region.
Thank you very much, Maya, and thanks for the introduction. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. It's always great. It's a highlight of my Sunday morning to talk with you and also to get the feedback when we close up the briefing and have the dialogue back and forth with people who are brave enough to come up to the room. There's a lot. I mean, my gosh, when Maya and I first started this, we weren't even sure that the audience would be tolerant enough, or there would be enough news compelling enough to continue this from week to week. But gosh, since we've gotten into it, so much exciting stuff. I don't know if I can cover it all. I will zip through as much as I can to make it somewhat cohesive, which is hard because there's a lot of different things going on. And then, as usual, let's leave it up into the Q&A period. We'll reserve, as much time as possible. I'll try and limit my comments to 30 minutes. But, we had the election, and contrary to what all the pundits were saying, and even I gave a, forced scenario about how the election results would reveal, where the LDP is standing and what's going on with the other political parties and how Kishida is going to be perceived. Almost all of the predictions were off, and so you've seen a lot of, excuses and kind of wiggle room in the newspapers and in the magazines and on television since then. So a couple of the things that we didn't get right were that the LDP and Komeito came back with still a supermajority. That was not predicted. The other thing that was not predicted was that the numbers of people going out for the election. Usually, if there's a high voter turnout, the LDP does extremely well. In this election, it was the lowest. It was the third lowest since the end of the war. So that's telling. The other thing that's telling is that remember we said for those people who were kind of Abe children, 3 elections or less in the lower house probably were going to get a shellacking. They were not going to do very well on this election. And in fact, what happened, it was the old goats who suffered. The older established parliamentarians lost in higher percentages than the younger guys. And as a consequence of the wins from the younger guys, everybody, so the fellows who were 3 terms or less, and now that population is 4 terms or less because we just had one more term established. So this group of people that we were talking about now comprise 50% of the entire lower house. That's huge. First we were thinking that they were inexperienced and not really battle tested because of the long Abe administration, but it turns out that they did extremely well. And on the other hand, oh my gosh, some of the older established politicians just fell off by the wayside. The most prominent of those is Amari, who was, we were talking before the election that it was Abe, Aso, and Amari, the 3 A's, who had a power grip on the LDP and on the selection of who was going to be prime minister. You remember all that? It feels like it's a long time ago. It was it was just a little bit more than a month ago. Well, it turns out that I think everybody knows already that he lost his seat. He lost his race in the single constituency race. He lost to a fellow from the Constitutional Democratic Party, if that's not rubbing salt into the wound. But they also ran him on the proportional system. So he won on the proportional system, but he lost on the count of his personality, his own public perception. And that's got to really hurt. So the way it stands right now, the LDP has a strong majority. With its Komeito partner, they've got a supermajority. They're not as strong as they were before the election. Komeito lost a few. The LDP lost a few. Everybody lost except Ishin, of course. I'll get into that a little bit later. But the LDP and Komeito together have a strong majority. But Ishin was a kind of an alternative to the LDP on the one hand and the Constitutional Democratic Party on the other hand. The problem with the Constitutional Democratic Party was that they formed an alliance with the Communist Party in those areas where, for example, they're not going to run a candidate because they just don't have enough candidates. So we're not going to, we're going to tell our people, rather than to vote for just anybody they want, vote for the Communist Party candidate. And similarly, the Communist Party will vote for our candidate in those election districts that they don't have a candidate. And there are quite a few of those because although the Communist Party runs a lot of candidates, in just about every election district, they run a candidate. This is very expensive and administratively difficult, but this is their philosophy. For the Constitutional Democratic Party, they need to focus on those areas where they think they can win, and then they horse trade with the Communist Party. And what turned out to be a very bad idea, the people who were in those districts said, if they're communists, they say, I don't want to vote for these guys. I mean, they don't represent me. And I don't have a candidate, so who the hell cares? And similarly, that psychology works both ways. So this dream of trading and I'll support you in your district and you support me in my that failed. And as a consequence, the leader of that party is resigning. He of I think all the political parties that were running, they suffered the most proportionately. I think they won maybe 8% of the races that they had candidates in. That's pretty dismal. I'm sorry, that the 40%. The Communist Party won only 8%, and that's because they ran lots of candidates, but only 8% of their candidates won. So the mix that we have now, that we can consider as something that resembles an alignment of ideas or concepts, is the LDP, Komeito, Ishin, and the Democratic People's Party, which also did pretty well in this election. They weren't really considered much of an alliance partner beforehand, but they're all kind of centrist now. Not too far left, not too far right. If you don't like the LDP, you could, vote without throwing up on Ishin or maybe Komeito or the Democratic People's Party. So with this coalition, there are 465 seats. With this coalition that I've just mentioned about the centrists, that's 345 people. So that's a huge supermajority. And the reason why this is important is because in terms of revising the Constitution, which is a dream not only of the LDP but also of Ishin. Interestingly enough, they want a stronger defense and they want a stronger response to encroachments in this region, basically against China. So that they're very gung ho about that, and they find joint interest with the LDP. Not so much Komeito. Komeito is much more softer. It's more for the peace constitution, but it is not unlikely that Ishin could supplement Komeito as a alliance partner. Unlikely to happen, but in terms of numbers, it's very attractive. They won. They started the race with 11 people. They have 41 people now. They did incredibly well, and they are a force now to be reckoned with. Their issues are a little bit more local, more centered in Osaka, Hyogo, Kyoto, around there. But you might remember that 2 weeks ago, or maybe it was last week, I guess, I went to Osaka because the battlefield was so tough. The LDP actually lost all of the seats in Osaka, all of the candidates that I went down to rah-rah for, and I also went down to rah-rah for some of my Ishin colleagues. They picked up all the seats, Ishin did in that district. So this is a kind of a precursor to what is potentially going to happen in the upper house elections, which is slated for early this summer. And we'll talk a little bit about that later, but I don't want to get too bogged down in it. So as it stands right now, the rankings of the political parties has changed only a little bit. It's still the LDP, which is the largest. The Constitutional Democratic Party is the main opposition party, but they've lost a lot of credibility, maybe. So much so that their leader, Edano, is resigning. He's decided to resign. He'll hold that position until they have a party election. Ishin, Komeito, and the Japanese Communist Party is the ranking. In terms of how the LDP looks, actually, the LDP, there are 6-7 factions within the LDP, and there hasn't been much of a shift there. They still stay in their representative positions of first place, second place, third place. All of them lost some numbers, so their positions don't change. So the number one by far is Hosoda, then Aso, and Takeshita. And the Takeshita faction, they had the leader of the faction unfortunately passed away just before the Kishida election, and their titular head is Motegi, interestingly enough, who just was a foreign minister, and now he's moved into the Amari position as Secretary General of the LDP. Following that is the Kishida faction, then Nikai, Ishiba, and Ishihara. The faction, Ishihara is, a pretty famous politician because his father was governor of Tokyo and his uncle was, the Elvis Presley of Japanese cinema. So a very, very prominent, very wealthy, very politically astute family. He lost. He got kicked out. And so nobody knows what's going to happen to his political faction that is under his name. So this is huge, right? I mean, a faction leader with that much prestige. And I think it was just arrogance. He thought that it wasn't a big deal. And people were kind of, sick of that kind of aura that is frequently given off by the LDP in general, but by certain members of the LDP. So he's out. His political faction went into the election with 15. It now has 12. It lost 3, one of them being their leader. So it is likely that these 12 might be floating around looking for a place to hang their hat. It could be that one of them asserts his leadership and takes over and changes the name of the Ishihara faction. So it just remains to be seen. I think I misspoke. Ishihara was 10 and 10 members, and now there's 6. So they lost substantially there, and probably that faction will disappear. It remains to be seen. So other factions. So the number 2 and the number 3. Aso is standing at 48 members, Takeshita at 47, the Kishida faction at 41. So there's real competition there. Even just adding 1 or 2 more makes a huge difference in terms of what kind of influence they wield within the LDP headquarters, and also what kind of committee seats that they are able to secure. So a couple of the things that are interesting with this new complexion is that you will see Ishin probably receiving a little bit more standard bearing within committee or within, I don't think within the cabinet, but there has been some changes in the cabinet. I'm going to talk about that in my next piece. But Komeito, with their coalition with the LDP, they did pretty well. And when you have that opportunity to exert a little bit of influence, you usually jump on it. And they've already kind of thrown down that glove, and they've come up with this idea to give everybody who has children under 18 years old 100,000 yen, Jumayen. And this is a very neat trick. I mean, the LDP kind of has to do it to keep them happy. And the reason why the Komeito wants to do it is because they're already planning for the upper house election. We're the party that got you the Jumayen for each of your children. You were able to take a holiday. Remember that 6 months ago? Well, now it's time for the upper house election, and these are our candidates. So they're already preparing for that. You might be able to expect something from Ishin as well. They might come in a little bit stronger on revising the Constitution before the upper house election, and use the upper house election as a signal, not a referendum, but as a signal to move forward. So now we have a mandate. We won really big, and one of our campaign issues was revising the Constitution, and everybody voted for us, and now we're going to go through the referendum. So that law, the referendum law, was changed under Mr. Abe, you might recall. It is the last hurdle for getting the Constitution changed. So they've already fixed that up. So the pieces are beginning to fall into place. There's plenty more to talk about, and I've probably unskillfully woven all of these pieces together. And so let's just hit that in the Q&A, but I'd like to move on. What's going to happen this week and next week of significance for all of us is that the elections happened. The prime minister is reinstalled as prime minister because he was running too. So the cabinet that he formed needs to dissolve and be reconfigured. So there will be an announcement of the new cabinet. So before you get excited about that, because that's a time of change and opportunity, it is unlikely that the players will change very much. I think there will only be one change. It could change drastically because we won the election. You guys helped me win the election. Now I want to put people in the positions who are actually going to help me get things done, not people who are going to help me get elected. But I don't see that. There will be one change, and that will be Mr. Hayashi, who will replace Motegi as foreign minister. This is a pretty big deal. Motegi was a good foreign minister following the foreign ministership of Kishida, actually. So they had a good affinity there with the problems that Amari had. And we can spend a little bit of time talking about his problems and why it ended up the way it did. I think that would be fruitful for us because it teaches us a lot about how politics works and how society works here. But Hayashi, you might remember, was in the upper house and resigned before the election so that he could run in the lower house. He is in the Kishida faction. He's number 2 in the Kishida faction. So that's an interesting point too. He's very popular, and his signal of moving from the upper house, where it's secure 6-year terms, no matter what happens with the prime minister, with the lower house, you're going to be in your position for 6 years guaranteed. You only need to run once every 6 years. And the reason why he gave that up to go to the more tumultuous and rumble tumble and street fighting kind of lower house environment is because he wants to become prime minister. That is clearly the statement there. And the reason why I know that is because that is precisely what happened with the fellow who hired me out of Japanese law school and brought me into the parliament to be the first foreigner to work inside the Diet. And he left the upper house, ran in the lower house. He won in the district that he was assigned. I actually left law school to come and help on that campaign, won by a landslide, and he too became foreign minister as a consequence of that. So it's interesting that the similarities are so profound. So Hayashi has a great, he's somebody that we're definitely going to watch. He's not somebody that you probably had thought much about earlier because he wasn't that prominent. He has had a ministerial portfolio in the past, even as a upper house member. But he's definitely somebody that has his eye on the prize. So we've got a lot of people that are already there. Koizumi's there. Konotaro's there. Amari is not there anymore. but he very much was before. So there are a couple of people that are floating around, and so that's something to keep your eye on. There will be some great movement there. So he is going to now be the foreign minister and really rise in prominence. You're going to hear a lot more about Hayashi. He's a good guy. He's an unbelievable guitar player. I think he was the lead for the. They had a band of parliamentarians, a rock and roll band called the Geens, and he was the lead guitarist. And those were the most prized tickets to get in Tokyo. When they had their concerts, they would have them maybe once a year. I think I attended 3 of them, but really a who's who of who's in town and who's in the LDP. But he will really make a lot of headway. So stand by for that. The other thing that's going to happen, in addition to a new cabinet being announced, is the Kishida announcement of a supplementary budget. So he's been talking about that for a long time. He's revised it a little bit. You might remember that he was talking about, the new capitalism, and let's give people, let's create this level playing field. Let's give the money from the rich to the poor. Let's create, let's reward the people who are in the middle class and the workers. And that idea lasted maybe 24 hours, and he was educated by the Ministry of Finance, and his tune changed. He said, yes, we're going to jigger the economy and generate more money and then distribute it so that more people are affected. But he's still on this wagon of a new capitalism. We've heard this before in many other instances in many other countries, in many eras, about a new form of capitalism. So it does cause people to catch their breath a little bit, but it will be more clearly revealed in this announcement of the supplementary budget. There'll be 4 key pillars there. It will be a lot of money. It will be like shock and awe. This is how much money we're going to be spending, something similar to what Joe Biden's administration was doing in terms of, generating interest and building enthusiasm. Those kinds of numbers help do that, but putting it together is a completely different thing. So we'll wait and see. In his supplementary budget speech, you can expect him to talk about these 4 issues. That is the new capitalism that he is further refining now, what exactly that means, how you're going to be able to encourage the corporates who have been able to storehouse lots of cash under the Abe administration, under Abenomics. The dream was trickle down. Trickle down didn't work. The companies just hoarded the money, and wages didn't increase. And so that's really the main rub. People who own stocks and bonds did extremely well, but the role of the ordinary worker and the ordinary salaryman did not improve. And that's the big rub for Mr. Kishida. You will also see him talk about increase in defense spending, just by tradition, not by rule or by mandate. Typically, Japanese defense spending hovers around 1%, and this new supplemental budget will probably be kicking it upwards of 2%. So there's a lot of interest in developing that and purchasing new systems, more defense, and more potentially dual-use capabilities. And in order to, make this palatable, they do have to address the constitutional issue. So a lot of things are going on hand in hand. The one thing that would accelerate this incredibly would be something happening with North Korea or something between Taiwan and China. You'll already notice, a lot of the military maneuvers, the naval maneuvers that are going on in Japanese waters. For the first time in 20 years, a German battleship has visited Tokyo. Mr. Kishi, defense minister, visited it and reviewed the troops, I think maybe 2 days ago. So these ports of call will be increasing, and even when they're not increasing, there's a lot of activity on the water and in the air. So you can expect the defense increase to receive a lot of play. You'll also hear Mr. Kishida talk about his response to Corona, the development of oral vaccines or technologies and devices to take care of people who do get sick and are hospitalized. there'll be more facilities for them, but they're moving on. The strategy now is not kill it so that it never exists, but understand that it's going to exist and deal with it, but let's get the economy back on track. Wish we could have made this decision, 12 months ago or 18 months ago, but they're finally coming around to that. So there will be a lot of money invested in that, and also in the development of technology to supplement that, and also big ticket ideas for securing not only the supply chain, but also related to that, bringing technology here to Japan, the chips, the condensers, the manufacturing here, so that Japan can reassert itself. It once was, at the forefront, but it wants to reassert itself in this new technology, AI and chip technology. And then finally, of the four things that the Prime Minister is pretty certain to talk about is this idea of, in response to COVID, to give Jumayan to everybody who has a child, per child under 18 years of age. This is causing a lot of consternation. I think the LDP, when it first came up, they just kind of shrugged their shoulders and said, "Okay, if that's what you want, to keep you guys happy, you'll get one ministerial portfolio and you'll get a couple of committee assignments. But if this is what you want to keep you quiet, okay." But I think the uproar has kind of started for those people who don't have kids, or they have kids but they're older than 18, and all of a sudden they're seeing that other people are getting money. They're not. It's all tax money. It's kind of a funny rat race, but it is pretty much up in the air how that's going to shake out. I'd like to move on now to winners and losers in the election. It could be said that the LDP came out as a great winner here. In terms of the number of candidates that they ran and the number of seats that they won, that was okay. They scored about a 78 percentile, which is pretty good. But they still are required to have this Komeito alliance. And the issues that are confronting the current prime minister require a lot of alliances with parties that are not completely LDP-like. So we can anticipate that the LDP will be gearing up for the upper house election already. So with Mr. Amari out and Motegi in as the Secretary General, one of the most important roles of the Secretary General is to pick the individuals to run in various election districts and then give them the amount of money that they feel like they need in order to win that election. That's going to be starting right away. So we haven't talked about the upper house election much. Probably in the next coming weeks, it will begin to loom a little bit larger and become something of an issue, in addition to this change of the Constitution. The other people who did pretty well, strangely enough, are Konotaro and Koizumi. So you remember that they had a bit of an alliance with Ishiba, Koizumi, and Konotaro for the prime minister. And they pretty much got a shellacking. The faction that Kono belongs to didn't really support him. The faction of Mr. Abe, who should have been a little bit more friendly to Konotaro, coming from his good buddy Taro Aso's faction, went elsewhere. And as a consequence, Konotaro ended up kind of in third place rather than even second place in the run-up for prime minister. So it's been a month since that happened. Strangely enough, it feels like it was just yesterday. But in the election, Konotaro also ran and Koizumi also ran. It turns out that these two individuals, of all the candidates, of all the people who run their seats, these two guys got the largest percentage of votes generated. So this is a remarkable piece of news. It was in all of the papers that even though, the LDP rejected him as a leader, look at this. Of all the election throughout the entire nation, number one was Konotaro. He received the largest number of support from his constituents, and number two was Koizumi. So this is something to keep in mind. Konotaro, as a consolation prize, received the PR position within the LDP. So he's the spokesman for defining and describing what's going on within the LDP. So this brouhaha with Amari, and he's, he didn't win his election. He only became a member of the parliament because of his high ranking in the proportional seat, and him resigning as a consequence of that. And now Motegi, this is pretty complicated. All of that storyline is being portrayed by Konotaro. So it is the one thing that he was lacking. People frequently said, he's had 4 ministerial portfolios, but he's never had a position within the LDP. That's why people don't know him. They don't like him. They don't trust him. Now he's got that role. So with the greatest number of votes that they both got, and going into the upper house election, you can now guess that candidates are going to be cozying up to Koizumi and Konotaro because they want to share in that limelight. They want to be popular and they want to be noteworthy. So in gearing up for their elections in the early summer, you will see the prominence of these two guys coming up. So after Kishida, yes, Konotaro is still there. It's a ways before Koizumi will assert candidacy, I think. He's still a little bit young, still a little bit untested. But probably you will have a race between Kono and maybe Hayashi. Hayashi, remember, is in the Kishida faction. So you've got that, right? Legacy building by the current prime minister. The other thing that's kind of interesting is you might remember that we had a prime minister by the name of Suga. And he doesn't have a political faction within the LDP, but he still wields considerable influence. And the interesting thing about current Japanese politics is that before the election, we had Abe and Aso and Amari. And then the other factions were somewhat affiliated with themselves, but not with the central power, which was Abe and Aso and Amari. And what you have now is you have the Abe faction, which is the Hosoda faction, standing kind of all by itself. It's the largest of the factions by far, but it's not the power coalition. The power coalition now is the Aso and Takeshita and Kishida faction. So Motegi is in the Takeshita faction. Hayashi, foreign minister, is in the Kishida faction. Aso is still, he's the number 2 faction. So Abe is getting a little bit less prominence because although he's the largest, these others have formed a kind of a power coalition. So what happens there is remains to be seen. He initially wanted his candidate, Hagiura, to be the Secretary General. He lost that. Hagiura became a cabinet minister as a consequence. And then as a consolation prize, they put somebody from the Hosoda faction into another position, but he's kind of not really purely a Hosoda kind of guy. He's more like a Kishida guy. So these things at the edges really indicate the real structure of power and help you predict on what's going to be going on next. Finally, just to kind of wrap it up, we talked about Rahm Emanuel as potentially the new ambassador to Japan from the United States. There's a lot of anticipation there. We've been without an ambassador for a long time, and the seat has gone empty. The appointment of ambassadors is being held up in the United States. It is not just Rahm Emanuel. There's a whole line of appointments that have not gone through because of resistance by the Senate. So the individuals have to be confirmed by the Senate, as you know. So the Senate hearings are not completely dominated by the Democrats. You would think it would be a shoo-in, but there are a lot of Democrats that don't like Rahm Emanuel because of his policies when he was the mayor. So then there are some Republicans who like him and think he'll be really a great choice. So it does remain to be seen. I think ultimately, once they open the floodgates and the papers start being signed and the appointments by the Senate are confirmed, or the nominations are confirmed, then you'll see real U.S. foreign policy begin to develop more robustly. That's probably a spring or summertime issue. It's maybe not even a winter issue. There are a lot of things going on in the United States and United States politics that cause you to believe that there will be more of a pause there than some robust movements. Kind of a separate topic for this room. Maybe we can talk about it in Q&A. So I've gone on long enough. I hope I've given you something that you didn't know and maybe help make some connections with things that you didn't understand, but now you do. But in those areas that I've not been so successful, maybe in our Q&A, if you jump up on the platform, we can ask some questions and maybe help other people understand those things that were less clear. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining this briefing. It's always great to see you. And Maya, let's kick it off.
Yes, thank you. And Timothy, I have questions to you. And I know that you dread this.
Oh, gosh.
Yes, I know. Sorry. Okay, my first question is, Mr. Hayashi is going to be appointed foreign minister.
Right.
So he seems to be popular with the general population here. And I think that this is because most of the LDP supporters are tired of the old faces. But at the same time, they still don't feel confident enough to vote for Konotaro and Koizumi. At least the people who are happy to see Hayashi in the parliament, I think so. Of course, Kono and Koizumi, they won a lot of votes by large. They seem to be the most popular candidates. But my question is, well, we have seen how people can be destroyed by media, by scandals. So are there any things or is there any possibility for Hayashi, to see the same fate, to have the same fate as Amari? Because
okay, so
he's a candidate down the road. He's probably going to be a candidate for prime minister.
Yeah, the Amari thing. It is somewhat strange because we've talked about this before. I think the fact that the claim was that he accepted bribes when he was minister. It was a substantial bribe. His secretary received it, and the records showed that the secretary took it and pocketed it and spent it, and Amari didn't know anything about it. And I think the public prosecutor's office also understood that story well. And it is possible that, yes, through the power of Mr. Abe, they didn't prosecute it, but it's also just as likely that there was no evidence of a crime actually being committed. And in fact, he's such a thorough politician. Although the money's tempting, your reputation and your viability is far more important. I don't think he would have made a mistake like that, but you never know. But the thing about Mr. Amari is that among politicians, you really can't call up other politicians and endorse or cajole them to vote for different candidates. It's like maybe a non-electioning policy that you're not supposed to do that sort of thing, to try and use your influence to compel people to vote for a member of the candidate when you're a politician. So there's some of that. You can talk them up and that sort of thing, but there's no rule or regulation against bad-mouthing people. So bad press or not even fake news, it doesn't qualify as fake news. It's just bad reputation, or this is the bad guy and don't vote for him. There's no restrictions on that. So and you see this happen in society and business too. These negative campaigns can be incredibly successful because they're short-lived. They are launched right at the time of a critical juncture. And no matter how much damage control you do, it doesn't have stickiness. It requires more stickiness. It requires more time for it to dispel the negative inferences. So these kinds of campaigns happen all the time. And in his particular case, it was very successful. So there were a lot of people who didn't want him. He lost to a constitutional Democratic Party. So it might have been part of that campaign. He still won a seat, but I think And once again, it shows us the distinction between winning a seat on the power of your own persuasion or winning your seat because you're on a list of people in your party. It's far more powerful and it's more meaningful within the LDP and within politics in general that you've won the seat because of your own personality and your speaking ability and the logic that you compel your voters with. So as a consequence of that, he thought it's best for me to step down. And this might be the end for his political career. He's already, although he looks very young and vibrant, he's, I think, in his mid-70s. So it's probably the end of the career for him. But with Hayashi's a Nisei Gin, so his father was a very popular politician. He, in his election district, is far more popular than even Mr. Abe. And he wields considerable influence because of his personality. He's a fluent English speaker. He's very affable, and I don't think he has many enemies. So I think you can expect him to do pretty well, even in the light of potential negative things. The negative things against Konotaro, I think, were played up, amplified. I don't think, nuclear stance or, that he's such a rebel. I think they were just played up for political purposes. I think both of those candidates and even Amari would have done a great job. But for Secretary General, it wasn't in the cards. I hope that responds somewhat adequately for the question.
Yes, it does. Thank you. My next question is, so you mentioned that Kishida, he's going to announce the next supplementary budget. And we know that in Japan, so the fiscal year budget is voted once a year, right? And it is announced once a year. Just I wonder how many times can the government and also the Diet vote for supplementary budgets?
As many times as they want.
Haha.
Yeah, so the supplementary budget is to deal with issues that have come up as somewhat out of the blue. So it's usually you pass the budget, you get it done, in the new administration, April 1st. That's when everything is kind of fixed. But for people that are doing business, that are have government contracts and that sort of thing, all of those discussions pretty much end around the close of the year, and then it goes into documenting and smoothing it over internally, January, February, and March, within the various ministries to be packaged into the budget. So this is a busy time for companies and businesses, not only just doing business with the government, but there's also that trickle through effect that people who are doing business with the government, big contracts, they also have suppliers and raw materials that they're purchasing. So it's a slow ship of state to get into the budget. So most of that work is right now. This is a very busy time. It's a busy time of the year for me and my company too. And I think it is with a lot of people. But that's the reason why, because the budget needs to be finalized, at least internally, December, maybe a little bit hangover in January, but it all needs to be packaged and passed in April.
Thank you for that. And I have another question to you. So, well, we haven't talked today about the policies which the new government is likely to announce and follow
Right.
as well. And we have seen that there is really a huge shift from in the focus of the global, let's say, global elites and the governments as well. Because until last month, most of the governments and international organizations like WHO and WTO, so they were talking mostly about the pandemic, and suddenly now everybody's talking about the climate change. So I wonder whether this and how, of course, probably it will be reflected in the new policies announced by the cabinet, but still, to what extent it will be the focus of the new government. And also, of course, everybody's talking about phasing out the fossil fuels. So I wonder whether Japan is prepared to do that, and the government is prepared to do that too.
That's a great question and a great observation. I think, I could be wrong, but I think the the flavor of the month was climate change. Mr. Kishida went. He was there for less than 48 hours. They say that he had a meeting with President Joe Biden, but I think that's just a meet and greet. Hi, Joe. How are you? And did you go see the Pope? And
Yeah.
that sort of thing. I mean, it's just too brief. There's too much going on. It was a meeting probably with 6 or 7 other leaders in the same room, and let's just call that a meeting between Joe Biden and Kishida, because boy, it's just like Ron and Yasu. These guys are really hitting it off. I think that's what they want to portray. But also, you've seen a little bit of backing away from this, the carbon commitment. You've heard pronouncements, even though it's a little bit early because the cabinet has just been configured, and it's a little bit early for cabinet ministers to be saying very much. But with Koizumi out of the environmental ministry, you don't have such a strong proponent anymore. And plus, Japan is all about business, about selling things, about importing at the low end, fixing it, refining it, and producing it and selling it at the high end for international markets. The one idea that is beginning to generate a lot of attention is carbon taxes. So this could be part of that new economy, not Kishida's idea, but it could be something that begins to get traction, except for Russia and China. But the policies that the policies will start coming out like pretty furiously, because it's been the business of what's how you're running the country has been pretty much in a hiatus, not completely, but pretty much in a hiatus for the last 2 months. But you see, just now we appointed or voted for a new prime minister. We had the election a week ago, and already, instantly, business travelers and students can come into the country 3-day, period for waiting to see if they've got the disease or not, and then a PCR test, and then you're released. So that's pretty rapid. And I think between now and the end of the year, you're going to see a lot more pronouncements like that. So we can anticipate that for the, whatever participation they've decided on for the climate change, but also with energies and renewables, with the carbon tax and that sort of thing. I think you're going to see a lot of action there. So it'll be pretty exciting, actually. I think probably on this room, we're going to be talking more about the policies that are coming up at a furious rate between now and the end of the year. It'll be interesting.
Thank you. Well, and we've got Yuka.
Hi, Timothy, and hi, Maya. Thank you again for a great room.
Gosh, I'm so glad you came up and to ask a question.
Yeah, I know, for a change.
God.
Actually, I missed this room last week, and then I felt so lost. So I'm glad that I was able to come back. Oh, just an FYI, starting tomorrow, we are heading into the winter time. So you guys are starting 1 hour earlier. So I gotta try to be home for this room. So I have one question, one comment, and one request. So I got everything for you, Timothy.
Yoo-hoo.
So,
Lovely.
so let me start with the one comment first. And so you were telling us, Konotaro and then Koizumi won a lot of votes. And then they weren't. I mean, the Konotaro wasn't elected for prime minister. Does it tell us Japan is again not a true democracy? I know, Timothy, you kept telling me, yes, Japan is like a parliamentary democracy, but in my naive mind, Japan is not a true democracy. So again, it's just my comment. And my question is, going back to two reasons why Mr. Amari lost out. According to the political analyst, he's a Japanese, he was saying probably like this scandal that really hurt him, that because the nature of the scandal was money issue. If the scandal was related with the mistress, a female issue, that really didn't hurt him that much. So I hope he was wrong about this, because if that's the case, that's tell us a lot about Japanese society, right?
Mm.
And then my request is, so you said next week, or the going forward, you're going to talk about upper house election, and then when you do that, could you sort of educate maybe me most how these two elections relate to each other? Thank you.
That's great. Let me hit them the way that you gave them to me about, is Japan a parliamentary democracy? So I have to be careful on how I answer this, because, even the Supreme Court said that the distribution of electoral votes in certain districts, they didn't say, they couldn't say, it's kind of, asking the same question to the Supreme Court as you just asked me. They couldn't say that it's unconstitutional. What they said was, it is in a state of unconstitutionality, which is not the same thing. So they didn't cancel the votes. They didn't order that the votes be recount, or that the distribution of seats be immediately made. They just kind of used weasel words to say it was in a state of unconstitutionality. This is a different issue than what you've asked me, but is it a democracy? I think it's important for the population to believe that their voice counts, that they can petition the government, that they can get redress, that laws and regulations are evenly applied, and that they are just, and that crimes will be pursued and the guilty will be identified and punished accordingly. Those are kind of the precepts of what we consider to be a democracy. And I think even by that standard, you can't even look at the United States and say, oh, okay, well, that's a real democracy over there, because it's not. And those things that I just rolled off the tip of my tongue, there are plenty of problems in the United States about each of those issues. So I think running a country and having a democracy and having your voice matter, and having your vote counted, right? You see where I'm getting to. It's extremely difficult, and people who want to corner the market or increase their power and their authority, yeah, it's a constant battle. So, for example, it's a little bit unrelated, but I hope you understand what I'm talking about. So these wonderful, beautiful, very sexy and very appealing Abe no mask, these gauze masks that were ordered by the thousands by Mr. Abe. How in the hell did that happen? And they're in the warehouse. Nobody wants them. Who benefited from that? And how did that kind of thing happen? It's somewhat representative of that. This My Card system started actually under Amari. This idea of giving a social security number type to all people in the country, and then conveying the biometric and the data and all of these wonderful things within this number, this system, and also have it represented in a card, right? A card like a driver's license that you would carry around with you, and it had the data reading devices so that it couldn't be hacked, but you could use it very easily. That one has gone nowhere. It's like a lot of things that somebody comes up with a wonderful idea, they're getting something out of it. It's an idea that has a certain amount of appeal, but then it dies on the vine. It looks like, if they don't do something really quick with the My Card system, it's going to die. Go ahead.
Sorry. So you're saying that, I'm trying to summarize what you just said before you talked about this My Card or My Number. So you're saying that running a country is separate issue from having a democracy? Is that what you implied earlier, or I misunderstood?
No.
Okay.
Even running Myanmar, right? It's difficult, and that's not a democracy. So, but Japan has portrayed itself as a parliamentary democracy, and they have two houses of legislature, and the members of parliament are elected by vote of the people in constituencies, and there's supposed to be a ratio of how many votes equal a certain seat in the parliament. So these kinds of these are basic aspects of what a democracy is. In reality, how it's run, how it actually manages to get votes? How it, does each member of the parliament wield the same amount of influence as any other member of parliament? And now you're starting to talk about, well, there's coalitions that are called, political parties, and within political parties, sometimes there's factions, and there's group voting, and these votes are dictated by, party headquarters or by influential people, and the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And so there's a lot to be said about it. I mean, that's a pretty deep question. I think if you ask me just flat out, yes, Japan is a parliamentary democracy, and I think largely the voice of the people are heard by those who are driving policies and driving the country, but it's not perfect.
Can I say one thing about what is democracy is about? To support what Timothy was really struggling to describe or define about the situation in Japan. I've studied MA in I got my degrees from politics from British University. My course is actually European politics and democracy studies. So I've studied about what is democracy is all about at MA, and my thesis was about democratization in Russia under Yeltsin. So I really dig deeper about democracy itself. And what Timothy was really trying to describe is that it's really depending upon how you define democracy. Because commune democracy is also democracy, and liberal and democracy are not the same.
Right.
And every country has got different definition of so-called liberal democracy. Although nowadays people talk about democracy is all about liberal democracy, but American liberal democracy is different from Europeans, and even among Europeans, they define different ways. So, and I've quite so many times I've discussed about the democratization issue with the professor who was the leading scholar of the Russian politics in UK. And he was challenged by the Russian scholars to describe about what is democracy is all about. And he couldn't make them understand what is democracy for the Russian scholars who are really looking for liberal democracy in Russia. Mm. And he couldn't actually convince me to understand what is democracy, so that I had an open question for my thesis. Because I couldn't understand, because whenever we talk about liberal democracy, America always say it's different, because whenever we reach to the certain point, America say the story is different. So all I can say is every country has got different histories, and every country has got different systems, and so on, so the it's always what is liberal democracy is all about is always open question to everybody.
Absolutely.
And obviously they evolve depending on the times and the issues.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Even we have the constitution, how you read the literature, or how you define, or how you read between lines different time to time. So
right.
It's an open question and evolving and never-ending story about how you define.
Yeah, well, that's why I express my hesitation to respond, because sometimes, I mean, it can be, my answer can be viewed as a criticism. Why aren't you doing it this way? You should have it right. It's just very difficult. It's actually a pretty difficult question, as you outlined.
Yes.
Maya, can I get back to the other two questions that were asked?
Yes. So you got questions.
The second one was about Amari, and if it was maybe a woman's issue or something else, maybe he would have survived rather than the money issue. And I think with Amari, he was so powerful, and any issue would have been okay. A crooked toenail would have been okay. And they would have hammered it, and maybe the damage wouldn't have been as great. I don't know, but for him to lose that seat, they poured a lot of money into that race, and Unfortunately, he lost. He had a safe bet with still being high on the proportional race, but I think he did the right thing by stepping down. Edano also did the right thing by stepping down. It's interesting that the Communist Party, who lost far more proportionately, the leader Ishii is still, gung-ho on that. And then finally, you asked about the upper house and what is the distinction between the upper house and the lower house, and why is this election perhaps important, and what are the dynamics there? And absolutely, I'll get into that. I was involved in several upper house races, and yeah, it's different from the lower house race. They still have a proportional distribution and a single seat, but the kind of candidates and the kind of individuals that are generally selected to the upper house as compared to the lower house is distinctly different. So we can talk about that, but maybe the time is not now. But thank you very much, Yuka.
Oh, yeah, good. Thank you so much.
Next time, I guess. Right. And Tomoko, are you there?
Yes, sorry.
Yes, okay.
I was muted. My question is about the Komeito and Ishin no Kai. I think how far LDP actually is going to be a coalition with Komeito, because already, of course, LDP managed to secure a quite good number of the seats, and Komeito has got its own issue within the Komeito itself, as well as the supporting group of the religion itself. Already, it's really having a big issue among them. So my question, one is the question about how far LDP is going to work with Komeito, and the second question is about Ishin no Kai. Do you think Ishin no Kai will get better position in the future, or just another Rikken Minshito or any other opposition party has the history, well, have the experience of the declining, because I'm not really still not quite sure about Ishin no Kai's ability and capability of doing right. And also, I don't trust Osaka people about. Sorry, I don't want to insult Osaka people, but I cannot really still believe why the scandals, not scandals, the things happened about Isojins and the Osaka vaccination, because I know that particular company has got a huge long histories of faking the shareholder stock price manipulation with the clinical trials so many times, and never managed to launch any products. So I'm still, and yet of course Ishin no Kai got quite big support from Mr. Takenaka, so that they got the really good position at the same time. I'm not really still quite sure how capable they are.
Yeah.
So that's my two questions I'd like to ask you.
Okay. So the first question was how the LDP, how accommodating are they expected to be with Komeito in light of Ishin? Kind of that's the question. And I think the question is better at they tolerate this coalition with Komeito, even though Komeito is a little bit soft on things that the LDP wants to be hard on, and particularly with the revision of the Constitution and defense spending, and also big business, trickle down, that sort of thing. So they chafe a little bit at the need to have this coalition. I think the better question is how much is the LDP willing to accommodate Ishin, because Ishin might be the party of the future. It might be the better coalition partner. Irrespective of Ishin, irrespective of Komeito, the LDP already controls all the committee seats. It can dictate, how bills are moved through Parliament. So they already have. So we can anticipate there's to be great activity at the policy level within the Diet between now and the election of the upper house. So it will be very active. Ishin, the Ishin issue, I couldn't have said it any better than you did. This fight between the people in the northern part of Japan and those in the eastern part of Japan, this battle has been going on for centuries, and finally, through a lot of different things that have happened in Osaka, they've pulled their voice together and they've established that this is what we stand for, and we are an alternate choice to the LDP. People don't like the LDP, but they also don't like, the Constitutional Democratic Party too, because they're cozying up to the communists. So we're kind of the catch-all, and I think that's what happened in this particular election. The Constitutional Democratic Party has learned their lesson. They're not going to do that again. So Ishin is going to be growing faster in the east, and also they're growing here in Tokyo as well. So it remains to be seen. They need to establish their identity and figure out what their role is, but probably they are much more accommodating to an alliance with the LDP than Komeito. Komeito carries too much more baggage, but it was required at a time, and the relationship is firm. It seems to be working well enough, but politics, strange bedfellows all the time, as this coalition is proof of. But they're stranger bedfellows, and the LDP is in a position of it can gamble a little bit. In fact, it's got a little bit more leeway. So I don't think it'll be dangerously used, but I think that they're going to build on this coalition because, number one, they want Mr. Kishida just came out. I told you last week, one of the issues that he didn't talk about was the revision of the Constitution. Once the election was over the last 5 days, he's already talked about that. So that's a policy issue for Ishin no Kai as well, and not so much for Komeito. So that is probably one of the battlegrounds that will become more and more prominent in the coming months. I really enjoyed your explanation, though, Tomoko. It really proved the point about Tokyo and Osaka and this delicious difference between those two places. And I think you'll see more and more of this rising up because the Osakans are always chafing at these stuck up, well-dressed, straight-toothed Tokyo people, but they don't have any substance. They can't fight. I mean, if you met them on the street, you could kick their ass, and their food isn't that good. Our food is so much better. And our the center of Japan's soul is actually here. It's not up there, that sort of thing. Very interesting. Thanks for bringing it up.
Thank you very much. Well, it's the fight between Osaka. Well, it's just because of my distrust against Ishin no Kai's policy about several things. But I won't say I hate Osaka people because I know a couple of people there living there, and many of them are my good friends. So it just a matter of the trust of their policies and their what they've been doing as a policy in the local government as well as the national government as well. So that's all I can say in public.
Okay, there are a lot of things like that in Japan, like the difference between the upper house and the lower house. The lower house is rough and tumble and kind of scrappy, and the upper house is a little bit more elegant, and they speak with a lisp and they walk in a elegant fashion, right? They're very different, but they're part of the same fabric. And I think there are thousands of things like that you think one thing, but actually the texture is quite a bit different once you get into it a little bit. So a lot of times for foreign observers of Japan, they're confounded for so long because you would think, based on what your knowledge is, that it results in a certain conclusion. But what you find out more frequently than not is that your conclusion is wrong because of something else that you didn't quite consider. You didn't understand the weight of it and that sort of thing. So, for example, this room is just packed with a bunch of Japan hands. And the thing about Japan hands is, yes, they've already suffered through that. It takes years to kind of figure out that the reason why it's this way and not that way. You have to explain it because of these other issues that we're not really is heavily considered. But what a great room and what a great audience. But thank you, Tom.
And, well, to add some of the comments you just made is that some people locally, they are still living with the history from the Edo era or even before Edo era or related to the Meiji Restoration. That's something I've really felt with the people I've talking with the local people time to time, even now.
That's endorsed, that's supported. People like it like that. Yeah.
Indeed. Well, and Ren, good morning.
Hello, Ren.
Hey, good morning. Great room as always. I really appreciate everything you guys have been saying, and Tomoko-san's point about Ishin's. It was so interesting. I gotta be careful because my former boss is a huge Hanshin Tigers fan, so I gotta be careful about it. But
Right.
yeah, about Ishin, just one comment and then another question to Timothy. I think my observation was that the reason Ishin was able to gain so much votes is because, as you said, Timothy, but with a different angle, is I think a lot of the Japanese friends of mine, they were fed up with the opposing party, or Yato, who opposes everything.
Just criticize.
Yeah, they oppose everything. But when I'm in a meeting, when I'm a chairman, it's okay to oppose to another person, but you have to show the alternative.
Yes.
And I think that was the problem. I think the Japanese general public was a little bit fed up with that. And I think I remember when Mr. Hashimoto was still with the party, he said something like, "We are not going to be a yato just to oppose for the sake of opposing the Jiminto." He said something about if the Jiminto's policy is good, I'm not going to say no. I want to be reasonable, right? I think that tradition may be still there, and that's why it caught some other people's, most of the Japanese people's mind. So that's my observation. And my question to you, Timothy, is about Hayashi. You mentioned he speaks English very well, and that's great. But if there's one thing you would like to share with us, how should I say, what will be different because of Hayashi's is now the new foreign minister, as opposed to Motegi, or they call it Mote-chan or something, right? I think, as opposed to Motegi. What would be one single difference that's potentially different that you can share with us? Thank you.
That's a great question. And you see something similar in the Ministry of Finance. So the Minister of Finance for a long time was Taro Aso. And he was also Deputy Prime Minister at the same time under the Abe and Suga administrations. He's given that up, and they have a new Minister of Finance, and it happens to be Mr. Aso's brother-in-law, who doesn't have as much financial acumen as Mr. Aso does. Not did, but does. So you can rest assured that brother-in-law is going to be, I mean, who knows if Mr. Aso still has an office there, or just a hotline, but you can anticipate that there will be very little change. But change is coming because just the environment calls for it, but it will not be without the hand of Mr. Aso heavily engaged there. Similarly, with the foreign ministry, the longest serving foreign minister in Japanese history is Mr. Kishida, and his number 2 in his faction is Mr. Hayashi. So you can, and in fact, when we had the problem with Amari and Amari was going to resign, Mr. Kishida was fraught with, so who's going to be foreign minister? Well, I guess I could be prime minister and foreign minister at the same time. What do you guys think about that? And that one didn't last very long. That one didn't look very good. And then it was, well, maybe if we assign Mr. Motegi to the Secretary General, he can be the foreign minister too at the same time, because otherwise we're, what are we going to do? And that one didn't go over very well either. And maybe that was just a gap filler for somebody else to say, I don't know, what do you think about Hayashi? Because Mr. Kishida can't say that. How about my number 2, Hayashi? So I've got the whole thing wrapped up. I'm prime minister. I've got the foreign ministry. I'm going to be in this thing for a long time. Same thing was said about Mr. Abe. You might not remember this, but when Mr. Abe was first elected as prime minister, he had a fitful start as prime minister. He resigned because he became ill. I think he was just hammered because of the job. But he came back, and then his personality began to become asserted. So now the only thing we remember now is I wish Mr. Kishida was like Mr. Abe, but Mr. Abe went through the same thing. He wasn't so popular. People said, he's just, a prince born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He can't lead the country. And look what happened. So I think Mr. Kishida also is very interested in developing his legacy, wanting to be, long-term, not have this revolving door prime ministership, which it's just as possible as not. It's probably more possible. So you've got to fight to keep that. And in order to keep that, you've got to put your friends and your supporters in positions where they feel indebted to you. So when you need to call in the chips, they're there. And you also have to deal with your enemies appropriately too. So I think the Hayashi, I think it's his first term as foreign minister, but he does have ministerial experience. He will rely heavily on what the bureaucrats tell him, as one wisely should. They're the ones that are actually doing it. And the figurehead is the parliamentarian who has been assigned as a ministerial portfolio. But plenty of times there's derision, there's disrespect between the policy bureaucrats and the political appointee. So sometimes the ministers really can't do anything. They can't guide anything. The bureaucrats actually have a hold on, what actually is happening. And within the ministries, foreign ministry being one in particular, there are factions there. There's the anti-American faction. There's the, we love China faction. There's the ones that are in love with the United States because they're all educated in the United States. So there are lots of different factions. So I think you'll find in the foreign ministry that there will be challenges, there will be change, but it's not going to be because Mr. Hayashi is expanding his breadth as a foreign policy maven or as a leader, but he will want to be scoring points to enhance his position as a potential candidate for prime minister. And there will be lots of opportunities as foreign minister, being on TV, representing the country in foreign fora, being on television and in the newspapers when a crisis starts. And this is the era now of, geopolitical crisis. And let me just give a plug to Maya's Monday Night Room with Stephen Nagy. If you want to get a handle on what's going on geopolitically, that is the room to attend. It's not every week, it's twice a month, but it's a really good insight there. I hope that responds somewhat to your excellent question, Ren.
Yeah, thank you, Timothy. And if I may ask you how your friends back in the U.S. have been telling you about how they had observed this election process and the result of it.
That's a great question. I'm honored that you think I actually have any friends.
You do. You don't.
But I have been living in Japan for so long that the relationships that I had with friends and colleagues in the United States have pretty much atrophied. I mean, I got my school buddies and the people I played rugby with and, stuff like that. But those are relationships. People don't even talk to me about business. They don't even care what I do for a living. And they, I don't have those kinds of dialogues. The dialogues that I do have are here in Japan with a lot of foreigners who also live and are engaged in business here, because that's where the richness of the dialogue comes. Because even to have a conversation like this, the foundation of knowledge you already have to have before you can even form an interesting or a reasonable question. I mean, that's a lot of time and depth. And I don't know, probably like you, Ren, there are so few people who are seeped in Japanese politics or what Japanese culture, what's going on in Japan, who are in the United States. Japan, does that belong to China? Is it a land bridge? It's a peninsula, right? You get that stuff too. But
yeah, I mean the Canadian Prime Minister's press release with press conference with Abe-san was an interesting one, right? Did you remember that?
No, tell me.
Oh, he was keep on calling Mr. Abe the Prime Minister from China, and then Mr. Abe didn't correct him in front of it, and he was Mr. Abe was criticized for that. But I thought Mr. Abe did the right thing. I don't think you want to correct another country, especially when they were the host of, So yeah.
Gosh, I wish that was true in this room too.
Yeah, thank you.
And then, well, with Timothy, I think that you were right. We need to go a few more minutes. So,
I'm okay with that, Maya.
Okay, thank you. So, Hayato, good morning.
Oh, hi, good morning. So, I'd like to just add some comment, maybe the potential interesting observation.
Great.
In the China, when you have this new the leader and the premier, they kind of divided their kind of interest of perk, meaning the military case itself, the head of the country, he gets energy, or the upside and the energy and all the kickback. In the case of a premier, the lead, he gets the commerce and the finance. So that's how those powers and the perks being kind of divided in China. In the case of Japan, I'm kind of wondering maybe now the similar, meaning that the Aso and his brother-in-law gets this finance or power around it, right? Then Abe and his real brother gets defense and their park around it. And now the Kishida is trying to carve out some interest around this foreign ministry, which he's good at it, as you know. Like he's the best probably foreign minister after World War II by far, right? And he is definitely the longest serving minister, right? So that's kind of I'm kind of wondering, because it looks the politics is becoming more like a family business in these days, even Japan, like United States, right? So that's one. Another thing that I'm kind of wondering that I'd like to kind of get your opinion is now that Japan is talking about raising the defense budget from 1% GDP to 2%, which is 60 billion US to 120 billion, right? Then today there's an announcement that Japan is going to invest about $100 trillion into the decarbon or renewables, in the future. So I'm kind of wondering, how we're going to get all this so much money, that's needed. I'm not talking.
Thank you very much. It's always great to hear from you, Hayato. Great insight. This idea that you have, or the suggestion you have, that it looks like there's a gradual amalgamation of forces to dominate certain areas of the economy or of the running the country. And if you follow how Japanese politics has worked and the vast number of people who are Nisei-gin or Sansei-gin in this family business, it does indicate that, yes, over time, certain families are more and more familiar with certain areas of running the business, the complexities, that they're more seeped in it. It does make a certain amount of sense logistically when you're thinking about how to get up to speed on, defense issues, that sort of thing. And just being a minister and doing, reading the drafts that the bureaucrats feed you does not seem to be very efficient. But I think in many countries, not to the degree that it's happened so much in Japan yet, they do have these fiefdoms that have been established. And I think probably, if I were to make a guess, I would guess that Japan is gradually moving into that area too, that in time, maybe 20 years, 30 years, you have different areas of fiefs of, it just matches, the Japanese history and Japanese sensibilities, that certain areas belong to certain houses. Like I haven't seen Dune yet. I read the trilogy, but I'm looking forward to seeing that movie. But these families that run certain areas of the spice trade, if you consider Japan being a spice economy. But yeah, I very much agree with that trend. I forgot what the second point was, Hayato.
Oh, okay. And also, second point was, that we're discussing about raising defense budget from 1% GDP to 2% GDP. That's a 60 billion US to 120 billion, right? Then, in addition, there's an announcement today that Japan is going to invest or finance about $100 trillion in decarbon, efforts in the near future with the consortium of the banks. I'm kind of
And your
wondering how
question
we
was,
want to get
where,
so much money.
where does all this money come from, right?
Right.
Yeah. So the funny thing is that wow, there is so much money in circulation, and even a company that is selling some product, a candy bar or a device or something like that, the vast amount of revenue that they generate from being in national commerce, that they have goods in stores or selling on the net, the vast amount of money that they generate is just so boggling. So the tax agencies say, we want to do the roads and bridges and that sort of thing, so we're going to tax you. And even they get a 12 or 8 or 7% of the taxes. This generates an enormous amount of money from every transaction that is done. So I think probably it's difficult to conceive of how much money is in the economy and how much money is actually available. But even if it's not enough to pay for all of these pet projects and these exorbitant things, the country can still print money. Some of it they do as a natural matter of course. Sometimes they can do it without it really even getting too much scrutiny. So these numbers that are being bandied about, and you noticed it first of all in the Biden administration, these trillions and trillions, and how many zeros is trillions, and where does this money come from? It's like almost in la la land. What is happening here? Why these numbers have never been in history been talked about, but now they're being commonplace. So it is a curious question, but it's also very curious that money and the economy, they're all kind of made up concepts. Somebody else is controlling that, not simple people like you and me, who really aren't in that inner chamber. Sorry, it doesn't really respond to it. It's more a philosophical question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for
Thank you,
staying
Maya.
with us.
Thank you, Maya.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
This was Japan Expert Insights Room on Japanese politics. Thank you for coming and staying with us today. We will be on air next Sunday at 8:30 in the morning, Japan time again, so join us. Until then, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the conversations on Japanese politics, business insights, and the role of Japan in the Indo-Pacific region. If you want to stay informed about our upcoming events, you can follow us on Clubhouse, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Again, we're looking forward to your joining us next week. Until then, stay well and enjoy every day as much as possible. See you!